data from a shared file server. So he IM'd me. We discussed a plan of action. Basically, he sent a shutdown command to kill that PC and remove the user's smart card from their physical access control system, just to make sure that when the guy came in on Monday, IT could get to his box before he got to it. The guy wasn't very happy, by the way. He got to work first on Monday and couldn't get into the building and wasn't sure what was going on or if he still had a job. So anyway, that got taken care of. This guy's box, it looked like it was a different service level account than the other one. This was the backup server, okay? Another domain admin credentialed account. All right, so immediately we changed the credentials on that one. So on Monday we pulled that guy's PC and looked at the image suspect drive. We imaged the suspect drive and started doing some forensic analysis on that. Had another follow-up meeting with this third party. Fortunately, the last connections they saw to the suspect machines were on Friday, because we started putting the rules in, blocked everything, nothing could egress, so firewall rules are working now. And finally, the sysadmin got around to pushing out those Adobe updates that we had told him about 2 or 3 days earlier. So there you have it. We did a script. We kicked off a script that would scan their entire Class B for known signatures associated with the malware. Found no additional infected boxes. The only signature we found was on this file server, which we already knew. We left something there particularly to make sure our script was running right, so it would tell us that it was there. All right, just a little bit more we figured out after reversing the malware is that let's see. It looks like it does mostly gets. There's a curious lack of puts. So we're trying to think about exactly how this thing works. Okay, so if it's a get, it's getting like the login page, but you have to do a put in order if you're doing a user ID and password to log in. So we continue to puzzle about that, but I don't know if I've ever gotten to the bottom of that or not. There was an attempt. The code attempts to delete itself. Maybe we were able to stop it. Basically, let's see. Yeah, the exe launched Internet Explorer, got a handle to it, created a thread in the load library with the stack containing the DLL. Then it tried to delete itself, but you can't, once you've linked to a file, you can't delete that file while you're still running. So we must have gotten to it before it was able to delete itself. That's why we still had this specimen. So we figured to keep this thing from being infective, make sure that all these machines are only using non-admin accounts. Well, that wasn't the case. And then deny debug rights to all the accounts. Okay. And then we also found out the malware had the path to Internet Explorer hard-coded, so maybe if we just moved the binary around, it would break future versions of this malware. The malware also did a few other things. It looked for cached passwords. Whenever you try to log into a server, you locally cache your password. You can turn that off with one quick little security setting in your local security policy, but by default it's turned on. And the third party that we were speaking to was saying that they think that those attackers have a really strong cracking capability. So, no doubt, as soon as they were able to get the cached passwords for the admin accounts, domain admin accounts, they were able to break those very quickly. It also goes out and looks for other unpatched systems on the network, and it tries to create a guest user for backdoor at a later time. All right, so the question is, what can we do to create signatures for this thing? Well, the answer is not that much, because if you try to say, okay, well, I'm going to look for a particular string of files or registry entries, all I'm going to do is find an already infected system, so it's not going to help me prevent against future attacks. And also, you have to imagine that this malware is going to polymorph over time, so they're not going to use the exact same names for temp files, right? They're going to change those every time they spread the infection. So signatures, not so much. Probably looking to other areas. The question is, where did this thing come from? This is still open for speculation, but I have a theory on that. I found a thing called Ghost, which is a rat. Depending on whom you ask, a rat is either a remote administration tool or a remote access trojan. Okay, and I found variants of this Ghost toolkit have some very nice features, such as encrypted communications, a command parser for doing command and control, and so forth. This thing was a basic client-server model. You might think that that's really passé. Like today's botnets are mostly like peer-to-peer, right? You don't have this command hierarchy of a client and a server. But you know what? Here's this thing still working just fine, stealthily, and nobody noticing it. It wasn't the pinnacle of sophistication, but something it did do is it encrypted its communications. We knew we couldn't break its AES encryption, 128-bit encryption, but we could black box it. I mean, we had a copy of the executable, so we could just force feed it commands and then watch the output. So that's what we did. We opened a session config file. We initialized the crypto API, which is what does the AES encryption. Created a hash of a known password, which again got from this third party. They're pretty smart, and they'd been looking at this thing for a long time. And then we just used the hash to create a session key and decrypt the file contents. So that way we were able to see everything this thing did: list drives, copy files, external exec calls. And every time it did something right, it would say, "I'm happy," and every time it failed, it would be like, "I'm sad." So, all right. So what do we tell these people? Well, make them feel good. Hey, everybody's at risk for a 0-day, but how you approach it, how prepared you're going to be, and how much damage you're going to limit it, in your approach is another matter. So we said they really needed to have a whole framework of security, in depth, prevention, detection, reaction. For one thing, they needed an incident response plan. What are you going to do if something happens? Who's going to be responsible? What is it? The timetable for action? Who does what? Second thing is, obviously, this one I thought we figure everybody would know anyway. But for your domain admin accounts, put a very, very strong and hard to guess password on there. They had some commercial standard for their core desktop configuration, but you can go a little bit better. You can lock that thing down a lot more. There's some the DoD publishes some guidance called the Security Technical Implementation Guides, or STIGs. That's a really good set of guidance standards for locking down systems, operating systems, databases, web, and so forth. They were definitely behind on their patching, but more importantly, they had no comprehensive vulnerability management process. So anytime they didn't have anybody constantly monitoring for security vulnerabilities. So when one came out, they didn't have somebody going and downloading it, testing it out in a sandbox, and then pushing it out to their environment. It just wasn't happening in a timely manner. For that matter, there was no awareness or education training. There was some initially when the people come into the organization. They had to go through some training to get an account, but there wasn't any periodic re-education. Hey, don't click on those unknown attachments, that type of thing. And the other thing I mentioned is they didn't really have a dedicated security resource. So this was just one of many duties that their IT admins had to do, which is really a conflict of interest if you think about it. Your security person is supposed to be sort of doing checks and balances on what the people doing the configuration are doing. It can't be the same person doing both. So they had some of their external connections were forced through the DMZ, but others were not. So we advised them, hey, this is really dangerous in the case of this alarm box. You want to definitely isolate that thing, put it out on its own VLAN. They had no host-based IDS. Host-based IDS is what maybe Tripwire or some sort of tool like that would, you hash all your important system files, and then on a periodic basis you go back through and you rehash them and compare those against what's stored in a database, and if there's a change, then somebody's dropping rootkits on you. So they had none of that capability. They had, like I said before, blocking mobile code, or you're going to get everybody screaming if you say turn off all JavaScript, but at least push out something to turn off JavaScript in your Acrobat. They had a comprehensive IA vulnerability assessment probably about 4 or 5 years ago, but that's a little bit long. So maybe we advised them they needed to do that on maybe an annual basis, or at least every couple of years. Another thing that really impeded our investigation is they didn't have much in the way of audit logs. The audit logs got overwritten every 2 weeks. So we're sitting here trying to go down the rabbit hole with this thing, and the data, we didn't have enough data to go on to see. We could not